Have you ever wondered what it would be like to fight a war in the middle of winter, when the temperature is below zero, the wind is howling, and the snow is falling? That's what Napoleon Bonaparte, one of the greatest military leaders in history, had to face when he met his enemies in the Battle of Eylau in 1807. The Battle of Eylau was one of the most horrific and bloody battles in history. It took place near a small town called Eylau, which is now in Russia. Napoleon had 75,000 soldiers, and his enemies had 76,000. They were Russians and Prussians, who were allies against Napoleon. They wanted to stop him from taking over Europe and Asia. The battle started on February 7, 1807, by chance. The two armies bumped into each other unexpectedly and started fighting right away. It was a fierce and chaotic fight that lasted all day. The soldiers fought with muskets, bayonets, swords, and cannons. They fought in the fields, in the woods, in the villages, and in the cemeteries. They fought in the snow, in the mud, and in the blood. Both sides lost thousands of men, but no one was winning. The next day, February 8th, was even worse for Napoleon. He had fewer soldiers than his enemies, and he had to defend himself from their attacks. He used his cavalry, which were soldiers on horses, to try to stop them. But the weather was terrible. There was a blizzard that made it hard to see anything. Napoleon was worried. He knew that he was in trouble. He knew that he had to do something to change the situation. He looked at his map and saw that there was a lake nearby. He thought that maybe he could use it to his advantage. He ordered his men to dig holes in the ice and fill them with gunpowder. Then he waited for the right moment to light them up. He saw that his enemies were advancing towards him across the frozen lake. He gave the signal to his men to ignite the gunpowder. Suddenly, there was a huge explosion. The ice shattered into pieces. The water gushed out. The enemy soldiers were thrown into the air or drowned in the cold water. It was a clever and daring move by Napoleon. He had created a huge gap between him and his enemies. He had bought himself some time, but it was not enough to win the battle. He still needed more help. He looked at the horizon and hoped to see his reinforcements coming. He had sent a message to one of his generals, Marshal Ney, who was supposed to join him with more troops. But Ney was nowhere to be seen. Ney had received Napoleon's message too late. He had been delayed by bad roads and enemy patrols. He had tried to hurry up as much as he could, but he had not arrived on time. Napoleon felt alone and desperate. He knew that he had only one option left, to fight with all his might. He rallied his troops and gave them an inspiring speech. "Soldiers!" he shouted. "You have done wonders. You have shown yourselves worthy of victory, but we are not done yet. We have to finish this battle. We have to crush our enemies. We have to make them pay for their insolence. We have to show them who we are. We are the Grande Armée. We are invincible. We are unstoppable. We are Napoleon's men." The soldiers cheered and shouted, "Vive l'Empereur! Long live the Emperor!" They felt a surge of courage and confidence. They were ready to fight again, but so were their enemies. The Russians and Prussians were not afraid of Napoleon or his army. They were proud and brave warriors who loved their countries and their freedom. They were led by a skilled commander, Leonty Leontievich Bennigsen. Bennigsen was a veteran of many wars who knew how to handle Napoleon's tactics. He had studied Napoleon's moves and had prepared a plan to counter them. He had also received some reinforcements from his allies. He had more men and more guns than Napoleon. He was confident that he could defeat him. He ordered his troops to attack Napoleon's flanks and center. He wanted to surround him and cut off his escape. The battle resumed with renewed intensity. The sound of gunfire and cannon fire filled the air. The smell of smoke and blood filled the nostrils. The sight of death and destruction filled the eyes. The battle was a hell on earth. It was a frozen hell for Napoleon. Both armies were exhausted and wounded. They stayed on the battlefield for the night, hoping to resume the fight the next day. But the next morning, they saw that their enemies had left. The Russians and Prussians had retreated to the east, while the French had stayed in the west. They had no strength or will to chase each other. The Battle of Eylau was a frozen hell for Napoleon. He had lost about 15,000 men out of his 75,000 soldiers. His enemies had lost about the same number out of their 76,000 soldiers. It was one of the bloodiest and most brutal battles in history where Napoleon did not win decisively.